This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, another conversation with Andy Hirsch. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gwen, and we're two people with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this interview episode, Gwen and I have the pleasure of talking with Andy Hirsch. We're having him back on the show. His new book, Science Comics, Dogs, From Predators to Protectors, comes out this Tuesday, October 31st, and we have a great time talking with Andy about the creation of this book. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off at the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off at the cover price. Sometimes 50% off of the cover. But every now and again, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
That is true. And Derek, this month, Discount Comic Book Service has Andy Hirsch's Science Comics Dogs for $9.09, which is 30% off the cover price. Also, all the other Science Comics volumes, including Coral Reefs, Dinosaurs, Bats, and Plagues, which sounds like a really bad party list, are also available for 30% off the cover price. And you were telling me that some of Andy's other texts are actually really low priced as well. We have Barmits, which we reviewed last year and love, and his Garfield work, and a couple others. So really, it can be the Andy Hirsch shopping list.
Yeah, and in fact, they must really love Andy at Discount Comic Book Service because there's so many of his titles that they have up and at great discounts. So you got to check those out, as well as the other first, second Science Comics books at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your books there, please do send them an email and tell them that Gwen and Derek sent you. Well, Gwen, I'm glad that you were able to join me in this interview. You know, I've talked with Andy Hirsch on the Comics Alternative a number of times before. Kunka and I interviewed him last year when Varmints came out. And then there have been several occasions where I meet up with Andy Hirsch at various cons in Dallas and Charlotte and whatnot. But it's always great to have him on. It just made sense that you join in on this conversation because I know that you and Andy Wolverton and now Paul have talked about some of these first, second Science Comics books. So this was right up your alley.
Absolutely. And also, you know, I really do love dogs. They're a big part of my life. And so getting the chance to listen to this incredibly informative interview was just a lot of fun. Andy's a great guy. Yeah. He's just as cool as the dog in the book, I just have to say.
That's right. You know, in many ways, Rudy is kind of like a stand-in for Andy Hirsch.
Yeah,
when you think about it. Because, you know, both of them in their own ways are very lovable.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's take a listen to that interview. We're pleased to have back on the Comics Alternative Andy Hirsch. His new book, Science Comics, Dogs, From Predator to Protector, comes out on the 31st of October, this coming Tuesday. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Derek. Thanks for having me.
It's always great having you on the Comics Alternative, and, you know, I would see you all the time at various conventions, at what used to be my local shop in Plano, Texas, where you are, but since moving to Charlotte now, I guess my chances of seeing you have decreased somewhat.
Yeah, I probably won't see you again until Heroes Con next summer. You know that store closed anyway.
Which one?
Valhalla.
Valhalla closed? Oh my God. Okay, that's something we can talk about off mic. But I want the lowdown on that because I did not know that.
Well, as soon as you left, they're like, what's the point?
Yeah, okay. Well, I feel bad about leaving now. But anyway, and joining us on this interview, and I guess I'm introducing you guys, is Gwen, who is one of the co-hosts of the Young Readers Show that comes out monthly. And this book is right up her alley.
It is. Andy, I have a new puppy, a Scottish Terrier, so this was really a great read. It explains some things.
Oh my goodness, tell me all about your dog.
Well, his name is Marlowe, and he is a brindle Scottish Terrier. He's 5 months old, and he's losing his teeth and gaining his manly parts all at the same time. And so he's just like 1 minute he's like cuddly, the next minute he's all growly, but he's doing pretty well, and he's a total sweetheart. So he's my third Scotty, and really excited to have him at home.
I've never met a brindley Scotty before. It sounds adorable.
We'll have to put a picture either on the podcast page, or else I'll send you a picture so you can see him. He's awfully cute. So
yes, please.
Well, this is rather timely because I'm in the process of looking around for a new dog myself. My Old English sheepdog, Chester, unfortunately passed a couple of months ago. And yeah, it's really sad.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And over the past week or so, I've started to, I guess week and a half, 2 weeks, I've started to look into a variety of different places that have rescue dogs. And I've looked at a couple, so I hope to have a new dog at some point. But reading your new book on dogs was kind of a reminder of a lot of the things that I've been thinking about since Chester's passing. And then Gwen says that she just got a new dog. So this book could not come at a better time for both of us.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I started working on it a couple months just after I had gotten a new dog. So I was, I was doing my research. I was kind of getting to know dogs in general while I was getting to know him in specific. So
I thought I heard a little bark in the background. Is that just my imagination, or?
No, that's him. The UPS truck has just pulled up. So I apologize. He's got a big bark for a little dog.
Mm. Is that your dog at the very end of the book?
Oh, yeah. Well, and throughout. Yeah, that's him.
So your dog is Rudy.
Yeah, well, Rudy was his name at the shelter, and do you want me to pause for a second while I calm him down?
Actually, I'm enjoying it. Tell you the truth.
Okay, all right.
No, a dog bark in the background on this particular episode is appropriate.
All right. Well, I'll let him keep at it then.
Sure.
Yeah, Rudy was his name at the shelter. I decided to keep it because I thought it was a good cartoon dog name, Rudy. And it turns out that Julie and Mia, who fact checked and lent some advice on the book as well as writing the intro, Mia actually has a dog named Rudy, which I didn't even know. So there you go.
In fact, Gwen and I were talking about that introduction right before we dialed you up for this interview. And, tell us a little bit about how you met Julie Hecht and Mia Cobb and what role they played in this book, in addition to the introduction.
Sure. Well, I was familiar with Julie's column, Dog Spies, that she writes for Scientific American. And all the science comics books, they always have an expert that comes in because these books are, they're done by cartoonists. So we don't have a scientific or that kind of academic background. So they always have an expert come in just to make sure we've got all our facts straight. And Julie and Mia have long worked as a team on their Do You Believe in Dog blog. Oh, that's kind of a mouthful. So so they came in, they read it over, and made sure everything was good. Gave me some pointers. Said what was working and what maybe need to be reworded, or anything that if they thought I left out anything that was important. and anything like that. And they were just a delight to work with.
That is great. One of the things that Derek and I were also talking about is this is a really science-y book. And I know it's under the science comics, heading, so that makes a lot of sense. But I felt like I came away from this having learned a lot about animal classification.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, the process, I kind of had to learn how to research as well because, as I said, I don't have a scientific background. I've always had dogs. I took high school biology and that sort of thing, but I think it's a pretty big responsibility to, present yourself as an authority, especially to young readers. So I really took the research portion of the book very seriously. Texas actually has a pretty cool program that lets anyone with a public library card access university libraries. So I spent a while going down to driving down to SMU and UTD and exploring the stacks and taking advantage of their subscriptions to some real specialty journals and that sort of thing, and just making sure that I was using the most up-to-date information, the most well-sourced and well-researched information, and having access to that sort of thing let me get some of the really specific stuff you might see in here. There's a segment where Rudy goes through the dog personality test, and that's straight from the authors there.
Cool.
Well, tell us how you came upon this project. I remember when you told me about this, and I can't remember where we were. It's probably a con or something, but you had told me, or maybe it was at the comic shop, and you mentioned to me that there's some big news, but you couldn't say anything on mic. And then when I turned the mic off, you told me that you got the science dog book. How did you come across this project?
Well, when Science Comics was announced, I was finishing up work on Varmint still at that point. Mm-hmm. So I was at the point where I was realizing that I probably needed to think about what I was going to do next. It's a bad habit of mine of being so focused on a project that I forget that I have to keep working as soon as that's done. Mm-hmm. So I do need to have something else lined up. I heard about that, about the Science Comics, and I didn't think I was especially, not necessarily suited to that because I'd just been doing Westerns at that point, right? So I texted my editor, Callista, and I said, well, hey, Science Comics sounds cool. If you ever want to do one about something I know, like dogs or something, that'd be great. I was just saying it as a joke. I didn't, I wasn't thinking, but then, a few months later, she got back to me and she said, well, we actually do want to do a science book about dogs, and we think there's a lot that you could teach through that. And once I started doing my reading, I realized, well, wow, there's all sorts of really cool science behind this that I didn't even think of. I was just thinking I'd get to draw cute dogs, but there's so much to learn. So it turned into a book that it's about dogs and it's full of cute dog drawings, but there's also a lot of information about genetics and natural and artificial selection and all sorts of things that apply to a much wider range of subjects than just dogs. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of just the vehicle to teach that sort of thing through.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that's impressive about your dogs book, in that you deal with science, not just the science of dogs, but just science even in a broader sense. And I was telling Gwen something about this earlier before we brought you into the conversation, and that is I guess a great example of this is your section on DNA, and you talk about DNA mm-hmm. in a broader, more general way, and not just as it applies to dogs. And then you bring it back to canines specifically, which I think is really useful. But in the process, you introduce readers to science in a way that is not dog-centric, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's really useful to be able to take a lot of these things and, apply them more broadly and use dogs as kind of an entryway into more broad scientific subjects.
I just love the panel where Rudy's holding on to all this DNA and he says, "Yup, weird little tubes of DNA. Thanks, Mom and Dad."
Well, how else are you going to teach about heredity?
Well, and what Gwen pointed out, I think speaks to another part of this book that is very attractive, and that is the humor. And I know that a lot of the science books that First Second puts out does have its own brand of humor, but I think yours is unique in that you're using, unlike some of the other, not all of them, but unlike some of the other science comics texts that First Second has put out, your protagonist is actually the subject matter. And so basically we have Rudy as a guide throughout. And so his interactions with other dogs, his parents, the DNA and whatnot, people, I think makes it a really accessible and entertaining read.
I think that whatever of that comes through is just because I was having a blast doing this book. It's my ideal thing. I got to spend the better part of a year just thinking about nothing but dogs all day, every day. I started off, when I started the book, I got to spend, I think, the better part of a month just sitting in the living room in the armchair with my dog, reading about dogs, just, marking down research, taking notes. And, I was feeling great the whole time. So I was in a good mood. So our narrator's in a good mood. And I hope that I hope that is communicated to the readers.
But there's a lot of neat diversions, too, that are so dog-like. So any kid reading this who has a dog or loves dogs is going to really enjoy those segues. Like there's the part where Rudy's explaining that he's not just a cute wolf, that it's much more complicated. And he's saying, no, I'm not just a goofy-looking wolf. And he's starting to tell the story of how dogs are a species and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden he sees a ball, right? And he says, "Ball, there's a ball, there's a ball, there's a ball, ball." And he's like running off with it. And it's just so real and awesome. It's like shiny thing. And so it's a lot of fun to read this because Rudy is so funny and so dog-like. So yay.
Thank you.
I'm glad, Gwen, that you mentioned the ball because I was thinking about that as I was reading the book. I mean, not only is it something that provides some levity, and we get to see Rudy as a dog and not just as an intelligent, educating narrator, but I think the ball also functions as a connecting thread among the various sections of the book. Now, this book, Science Comics Dogs, is not divided up into chapters, but it is, I guess, episodic where Rudy goes from one bit of information to the next. And one of the things that pulls all of those sections together is this ball, because every now and again it'll come bouncing back and Rudy goes to chase it. And then where he chases it has something to do with the next topic that he brings up, or maybe the next connecting bit of information that follows from the previous. And then we won't see the ball for a while. Then the ball comes back. And I really like that because it helps to pull everything together.
Yeah, the structure of the book isn't necessarily chronological, so I had to figure out some way of, pulling you from one topic to another. And, with our dog narrator, well, what's going to get his attention? Well, that's going to be the ball. So it bounces from one thing to the next in the same way that the reader's interest might bounce from one thing to the next. And so I tried to, anticipate the kind of questions that they might have and just kind of bounce off that and use it to lead to the next topic. Because, I had to kind of assume that we weren't starting from anybody having any sort of thorough knowledge of dogs. I certainly didn't when I started the book. So every little bit has to, every time you turn to a page, I'm hoping to have already provided the reader with all the information they'll need to understand that. Mm-hmm. So it really has to build in well, not a chronological sense, like I was saying necessarily, but in a little more intuitive way. And I think the bouncing ball gave me the flexibility to kind of order things as I felt would be the most approachable, mm-hmm. rather than maybe the way it might be presented in a textbook or whatever. It's fun, it's comic booky, and it gives you that extra visual part, which again, it's a comic book, so you need the visuals. And that's a great way to get them.
One of the things that you do that I thought was really cool is you talked about how dogs perceive the world, and sort of one example you gave was like, we think of a shoe as a shoe. The dog categorizes it as thing I could chew, right? And so, yeah. Which I loved. What challenges did you find in trying to depict that? In other words, sort of how the dog sees the world. Because as a dog owner, I found that to be really actually kind of useful.
Yeah, it's I thought that part was really interesting to learn about myself because we'd had our last dog for the better part of 10 years, and Natalie was saying that when we got Briscoe, Rudy's actual name, Briscoe, we got him. She was just saying, "Gosh, it's so weird getting used to a dog who doesn't know how to sit. You're really starting from nothing." And I was trying to get inside get inside of the dog's head that way, mm-hmm. and learning about how they see the world, how everything is, it's very different from how a human sees the world. It's, you're not using your eyes so much, you're using your nose. They have access to all this information that is just totally invisible to us, and it defines what what grabs their attention. So, and that sort of thing. So when you're on a walk, I just see a spot of grass, but there's all sorts of information on that spot of grass that he has access to. What was there? Did somebody drop food there? How many dogs have passed and marked this particular spot? There's information about all his neighbors, all his friends. So he's just fascinated by this thing that I might be getting impatient about and wanting to get on with the walk, but he's still, I'm still looking at this. I'm still smelling this.
Well, there's this great panel that you do with the squirrel, and it's like the squirrel is alive and playable and eatable. I mean, it's the most awesome thing.
Very different from how I see a squirrel.
We hope.
Well, I guess to piggyback on Gwen's question about the challenges of representing the way that dogs perceive the world, I'm curious with the science in general, both the science of dogs and also science in a broader sense. What are some of the obstacles or challenges that you faced in making, especially when it comes to the DNA section, rather complex ideas, translating them in a language, both textual and visual, that readers of this book could understand?
Well, I think having the visuals really helps because I can use diagrams where they need to be, and I can use visual metaphors where they need to be. Like I can turn these DNA strips into little tubes that are much easier to keep track of, and you can kind of simplify things to whatever degree they need to be in the visuals, and you can count on the text to carry the weight when it needs to, and vice versa that way. Keeping it simple was definitely a challenge. Every time I would have a new draft, I'd have my partner Natalie read it, and she would say, do you even understand what's going on? Are kids going to understand what's going on? And I'd be like, okay, well, all right, well, let's see if we can pare this down a little bit, if we can find a better way to present that. So that was really something I had to learn. It was very much iterative as far as as far as getting things to be as clear as possible.
Well, I was saying to Derek that it reminded me a little of the later volumes of Secret Coders by Jean Luen Yang and Mike Holmes, where, like, the first volume, it was like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I understand coding. And by volume 4, I'm like, oh, my God, I need a PhD, you know? And it's sort of like this book, too. There were some parts in the DNA section where I understood what you were doing, and I think a kid would as well. But I had to go back and kind of rethink a little bit. I love the way you use diagrams, though. And I think that makes it really much more visually helpful in terms of understanding the science.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the advantages of doing things in the comic book format, in that you can pace yourself, you can flip back and forth however you need to. So you can really, you can spend as much time as you need to really absorb each topic.
Yeah.
Which, as opposed to, watching a video or listening to a lecture or that sort of thing, you have a lot more control over your own learning.
And in fact, my question about some of the challenges of translating really complex ideas into a language, visual and otherwise, that people can readily understand is actually a question that my wife wanted me or suggested that I ask you. And in fact, I got my hard copy of the dog's book at my Frisco address, and so my wife opened the package for me and looked through it, and she was fascinated. And she is a science writer, and in fact, she works with some professors at UT Dallas who also try to take some of the science that they do and put it into comics form. Now, I have to say, not nearly as great as your art, but but hey, you're the professional. But my wife was specifically interested in how you take some of these ideas and make them palatable in a way that could be understood by both younger and older readers. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask that question.
Yeah, I think that having a cute narrator certainly helps, right?
Yeah.
You can have a page full of DNA diagrams, and you might want to just turn to the next one, but gosh, there's also a cute dog making some dumb pun on there, so I'm going to stick around a little longer, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think your art, your style, is particularly suited to the, let's say, cute dog aspect of the dog's book. In that, I mean, anyone who's familiar with your other comics, like Varmints or Garfield, or the Baker Street Peculiars, I mean, there is something kind of nice, rounded, and welcoming about your characters.
I think dogs are maybe particularly well suited to comics because they're very much over actors, right? They make big actions and they have big emotions.
Yeah, I love the spread out paws one that he does a lot. It's great. That you have Rudy do this, like, big paws are up, and he's like, "Look at me." But on a serious note, there's something that I think is really valuable for people who are thinking about getting a dog and maybe have never had one. That is that this text really does talk about personality traits and the way that those are passed down and have been refined over tens and tens of thousands of years. And it's true. I mean, my last dog was a cockerpoodle. And his personality is so radically different than that of a Scottish Terrier. Part of what I'm doing right now in parenting this new dog is just having to constantly shift gears from one set of expectations to another. And that's really addressed in this book, I think, in a responsible way, because living with a dog is a big responsibility. And dogs are very unique, even within a breed. Like, I've had 3 Scottish Terriers now in my life, and this last one is totally different than my previous one, Shandy, who most of my friends are listening will remember fondly. Shandy was just a little gentleman. This dog is like a party animal, and and believe me, they do share common ancestors because Scottish Terriers are very particularly bred. So I know all of my dog's ancestors, and they're linked up there a little. But you can even have a really broad difference within a breed.
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing that was really important to me to get across was was really appreciating that dogs are individuals, that they they each have their own personality, and so not just to make assumptions about a dog just based on the way they look or what have you. They have long histories of what they were bred for, and that that determines what their body is like, which is going to to some degree determine what their behavior is like. And there's a little section about it, in the book where we talk about dogs with real short faces and their eyes face forward, versus the dogs with the long faces where their eyes face to the side. And your dog with more peripheral vision might be a little more distractible because they can see more. So that's their personality is being informed by their body shape in that way. And then and also we covered a little bit about how important it was to keep in mind that even though there are these big differences between like your average spaniel or your average terrier, right? There, like you were talking about with the differences between your Scotties, is that there's more possible variations within each breed than between the averages of the breed. So keeping that in mind can help you, not stereotype your breed or maybe have unrealistic expectations when you're getting a new dog. So in that way, really taking the time to consider how your dog is a specific individual, right?
Right. Yeah.
Andy, you mentioned that in preparation for this book, you did quite a bit of, I guess, formal research. You went to libraries and whatnot. What kind of study did you do in terms of, let's say, field work, maybe going to talk with various breeders, going to kennels, maybe going to rescue sites just to get a sense of actual dogs up close and personal?
Well, I've had a number of dogs over the years, and like I said, I was just getting to know our newly adopted dog. So in the months preceding, even starting on the book, we'd spent a lot of time, looking at various rescue organizations and going to meet dogs at shelters, and even since getting Briscoe, we've we visit with his former fosters, and we go to the dog park and everything. So that's really the field work there is really playing with a bunch of dogs and getting to meet a bunch of dogs, especially the neighbors who are now very happy to talk to you. I mean, you've got a dog, they've got a dog, your dogs want to meet. So it's a real good conversation starter there.
I like the bunnies and the squirrels in this. They're kind of, always running away, and it's great. You've got a lot of, Derek was saying, just a lot of humor in this text too, which makes the hard science. It's the spoonful of sugar,
There you go. Yeah, Briscoe is a chaser. Our last dog, he didn't have a lot of interest in anything but people. But oh gosh, Briscoe, he loves those squirrels.
It strikes me that your book on dogs is going to be, maybe along with the dinosaur book of the Science Comics series so far, the two volumes that are going to be the most appealing to readers. I mean, not that bats wouldn't be appealing, not that, let's say, plagues aren't going to be fascinating, but it just strikes me that if someone picks up one of these first-second Science Comics texts, that they'll either gravitate toward the dinosaur book, which came out, when was it, Gwen?
It was a couple of years ago. I think it was
2 years ago.
Yeah,
wow.
At least.
Wow, that long. Or the dog book, just because I think those are very popular creatures, popular topics, and also I guess dinosaurs in their own way are kind of cute to some people, but dogs definitely. So are you, I guess, anticipating quite a bit of interest in the upcoming dogs book?
Well, I sure hope so. And I think that dogs being a popular subject, I think is a good way to introduce all the, we were talking about how there's some wider scientific lessons in there regarding genetics that apply to all sorts of things. So hopefully dogs will just kind of be a gateway there to interest in a whole bunch of other subjects.
There's some artists, like for instance, Maris Wicks, who has, I think to a large degree, defined herself in her work by writing about educational topics, whether it be, I know she did a science comics books on coral reefs, she's written, or she illustrated a book on primates, among, others.
The human body theater, which
that's right.
Mention.
Yeah, human body theater that Gwen, you and I discussed a couple of years ago on an episode. So do you feel, Andy, after doing this dogs book, that you may want to do more of this educational kind of writing and illustration? Because, previously the work that you've done has been fictional, whether it be, the Garfield stuff, Varmints, the Baker Street Peculiars. Did you get a real liking for, in this case, science, education, and taking those ideas, putting them, translating them into illustrative lessons, so to speak?
I actually really did enjoy it. I'm an organized person who likes coming up with a system for presenting a thing. So having to gather up all these facts and then figure out how to pass those along, how to pick out what's the fun stuff, what's the interesting stuff, and what's the best way to teach that. That really appeals to me on just an organizational level. And it was also really fun to really be learning again. It's been some time since I was in school or doing any sort of research like that. And it turns out that it was something I missed. And working on dogs, and now that it's done, now that's coming out, I'd like to think I'm actually pretty well suited to it. So I'm doing. I've actually got a couple more entries in the science comics line coming up. There will be a book on trees that comes out next year. That one's already wrapped, and then I'm currently working on one on cats, which is kind of the natural counterpart to dogs. Yeah. So that one will be out in 2019. I think what you can kind of see is a common thread there might be that I'm tackling kind of your more everyday subjects, and I think that's the stuff that's really interesting to me is I guess plumbing these hidden depths to things you may have started to take for granted. Maybe it's been a while since you've really considered the fact that the dog that is sitting on your chair or maybe sleeping in your bed is this is an animal. Look at this hairy little beast who is now part of my family. We don't speak the same language or we don't have the same suite of senses or anything like that. And taking a step back and considering that, I think can really make you appreciate them in a whole new way. And moving on to other subjects, that's really, I've been trying to find that same appreciation in a whole lot of other things. And it's been good. I've been enjoying it. And I'll stick with it as long as I can, I think.
Yeah, I noticed on Amazon, they do have listed your book on trees, Science Comics, Trees, Kings of the Forest. And that's, according to Amazon, due out on August 21st. And I see on the cover you have this cute acorn. And is the acorn going to be the narrator, kind of like Rudy is our narrator guide in the dog's book?
It's a pretty cute acorn, right?
Yeah.
It's a cute acorn.
And I've never thought of acorns as cute, but you have flipped me now.
Well, slap a big smile on there, make it look like they've got a bowl cut. Yeah.
Acorn flipper.
Yeah, so I wanted to try and stretch my legs a little bit and not just do a repeat of the way I presented dogs for trees. So in dogs, Rudy is your knowledgeable narrator. He's speaking directly to the audience. And in trees, Acorn is brand new to the world and is very, doesn't really know anything about trees and is a little afraid about going through such a big change. So in that book, Acorn really encounters all the other creatures who depend on trees that make up this whole ecosystem, and they're the ones who are teaching the lessons. So Acorn is learning along with the audience, and there's a lot less direct to the reader conversation like you see in dogs. So it was I tried to do a different approach on there, just to see, not to rest on my laurels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that sounds great. I can't wait to read these, especially for cats, because I can now totally have to have an easy Christmas list for 2019. Because just about everybody I know but me has a cat, and they love their cats, and so.
I think
cats are great.
That's another thing. I was alluding earlier to the popularity of the dogs book within the science comics series. This is something I think, both your dogs book and your future book on cats, it seems to me it kind of, you have a ready-made audience, right? Because people love their pets, whether they be cats or dogs. And so this would be a text that they would easily pick up, whether they find it in a brick and mortar bookstore or they see it online. I'm really hoping that the sales for these books, the dog and then the 1919's cats, really do take off.
Yeah, hopefully, people will come for the pets, stay for the science, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think for the responsibility of being a dog owner. That's really what I got out of this book in a lot of ways. I always have respected and loved dogs, but this really made me respect them even more based on how they evolved and how complicated they are. And I think a lot of times people look at a cute dog and they just get drawn in by the cuteness, and they're not really stopping to think about the behavior and how, what a great responsibility it is to help this creature be comfortable in your home. And so I think that there's some good in these texts beyond the science and the cuteness. There's also an ethics component, and I really think that's great.
Oh, that is the exact response I was hoping for. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, and I'm attuned to it right now because I have this great responsibility of this little baby dog at home, and want to make sure that he has a really happy life. And there's a lot that goes into that. So
yeah, absolutely. I kind of think that we have almost a species level responsibility for these animals, just because, reading through the book, humans have been responsible for so much, from the very beginning to, from the very first domestic dogs to how severely we've artificially selected for all these different dogs. And I think that, when you exert that much power on something, you have a responsibility to try and understand and care for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that you make clear throughout the book, is that because humans have had such a hand, and an intentional hand, in shaping the evolution of dogs and their domestication, that it's really our responsibility to follow up on what we've done. There's one point where you point out, where you illustrate literally that humans have bred dogs in ways that are a little selfish. So, for instance, that I guess during the 18th and 19th century, dogs were bred to be smaller so that women could hold them more easily. And, on the one hand, that's fascinating, but on the other, you think, you're doing this for, if we can call it, selfish human reasons. And so if there are any potential drawbacks to the changes, the evolutionary changes through the human breeding tactics that we got to see to it. If there are any messes, we have to clean up. There's the issue with pugs that they seem to have some kind of breathing or nasal problem. Every pug I've ever been around is really loud, and I wonder, is that healthy? But I know that they've been bred by humans to look that way.
Yeah, the thing is that a lot of the things we find cute are super unhealthy, and that was all that was really some of the toughest stuff to cover for the book, because one of the things I really wanted was to make everyone feel good about their dog, to make them look at their pet and just glow, be happy about it. But a lot of people also have dogs that are, they were bred in ways that are frankly not good for them. And hopefully you can still appreciate your dog without feeling guilty about your dog, but maybe, appreciate this individual, but in the future, maybe try and not perpetuate this sort of thing. And I tried not to really make any strong judgments in the book, and just present the facts, present that this is what we've done, this is how it affects the dogs, and really kind of let the reader draw their own conclusions from that.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I have a Scottish Terrier, and I have to tell you that the breeding world is a very interesting place. Scotties are very hard to get because, at least today, breeders have acknowledged that the way that they're shaped physically makes them not an ideal dog to mate with any other kind of dog. And, and so to get a Scottish Terrier, it takes a long time. If you're serious about getting that, if you want that kind of dog for a particular reason, it's actually really hard to do. And I think that's actually a good thing, because these dogs are built in a very particular way. They don't mix well. And so, even if you most of my friends adopt their dogs, rescue their dogs. I did make a conscious decision to get a Scottish Terrier, but I also went with a breeder who I know takes this breed seriously and doesn't want these dogs to have a bad life in any way, and only has maybe one litter a year. And it's a very serious, but it took a long time to find that information out. You won't find Scotty mixes because they don't mix well. They were bred to do one particular thing, and it doesn't mesh well with a lot of other kinds of dog. So, it's really complex and scientific. And I'd have to say that reading this book helped me to understand my particular dog far better than I had before.
Good. Yeah, it's it's not an anti-purebred dog book in any way. It's more of a pro-responsible breeding book. I'd like to think. My last dog was a purebred dog as well, and he was a Cavalier Spaniel, and he was just a saint of a dog. You could not ask for a dog with a sweeter personality, or he was just nice as could be. But he passed away younger than he should have because of breed-related health problems, which you just, going into it, you have to acknowledge that's a part of it.
But it's interesting too, because the book helped me understand something else. My last dog was a mixed breed. It was a cocker poodle, and I'm not sure what percentage poodle and cocker we were dealing with, but these dogs now are highly susceptible to encephalitis, which is what my dog died of. And it's definitely genetically being passed on. They have the genetic predisposition, but the environmental part apparently is what some vets are calling, at least vet neurologists I worked with when my dog was sick, was over-vaccination of dogs. Uh-huh. And
that's fascinating.
like really strong vaccination amounts and sort of recurring vaccinations that somehow triggered something in my 4-year-old totally healthy dog that meant that a month and a half later he was gone. And so, it's when you talk about sort of breed specific issues, then you talk about the impact of the environment on dogs. That's so true as well. And I think this is one of the new frontiers, is figuring out, okay, we found a way to make sure your dog doesn't get heartworm or doesn't have fleas and tick problems, but is that killing your dog now? These are really serious questions. So
Yeah, for a long time, it's my understanding that the scientific community didn't think that dogs were really worthy of study. Like I said, when I was suggesting doing the science comic about dogs, I thought, well, dogs are just dogs. But recently, there's all sorts of new science, and it's really been picking up momentum. And there's all sorts of things that we still need to learn about.
Well, Andy, in researching and preparing for the Dogs book, what is, I guess, the most outstanding thing that you discovered that you didn't know before about dogs?
Oh gosh,
maybe that's too hard a question.
Yeah, it is. Well, I can tell you one thing that there wasn't really a great place to fit into the book, but I learned that that no matter what breed of dog or what mix of dog or anything like that, aside from some really extreme examples in as far as sizes, like your Great Danes or your tiny teacup Chihuahuas or stuff like that, almost all puppies are about the same size and shape. So these newborn dogs, aside from the most extreme examples, they're all just dogs. They're like these basic dogs, and they grow into this wide variety of shapes just as they develop. And that's just the craziest thing to me, that they can start from the same step and turn and end up so different.
Well, were there a number of things that you wanted to include in the book, like you just mentioned, that you didn't have room for?
That was one. We didn't. I didn't really talk any about early dogs. Well, I didn't really talk about early dogs' use as a convenient food source or anything like that. That we kind of gloss over, and that's okay. I don't think we're losing a lot by saying that, but so that's, like I said, it's a good-natured book, and we're gonna stick to the stuff that makes you feel good about your dog, while not not ignoring important things, nothing like that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I don't know, Derek, and if you've experienced this, or Andy, but the way that veterinary medicine even regards dogs as individuals now has shifted, and I know that some of that is profit motive. I mean, in other words, they want you to feel good about your experience at the vet, but the last two dogs that I've had especially, so that's like from 2015 on, in very real ways, it's like you're their parent. That is how my vet folks refer to me. Oh, it's Marlo's mom's on the phone. Oh, Marlo, your mom's here for you. And so there's a way in which, when we think about the cultural context of this, how really even increasingly we're looking at dogs specifically, I think, as being child surrogates even in our culture, which is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. It's funny whenever anybody says, "Oh, you're Briscoe's dad," or anything like that. I'm like, "Oh, he's not my son. He's my deadbeat roommate who sits around naked all day."
This is interesting because I hadn't really thought of this until, Gwen, you just mentioned it. But with our sheepdog Chester, my wife Amanda and I would refer to the other, talking about Chester, as mommy or daddy. So, for instance, when Amanda would come home from work and I heard the car door slam, I would say to Chester, "Mommy's home, mommy's home." And of course, he would go look at the front door and wait for her to come. And then Amanda would refer to me as daddy to Chester. But I never gave that a second thought. That was just something that we did. But you're right. I mean, there is this sense of connectedness to your pets, especially, I think, a dog. Cats are different because cats have an attitude in ways that dogs don't. But, you are like a parent caring for a child. And I can tell you, having had a couple of kids and still have a couple of kids, they're grown now, but you have to care for them in ways that are not completely dissimilar for caring for a pet.
It's true. You do.
That sounds weird, I know, but
You have such awesome kids, but I'm sort of seeing them listening to this and going, "Oh, Dad."
Yeah. You have to potty train them. You have to take them outside to run around and let the stink be blown off of them. It's there's similarities there. Well, Andy, you have apparently found a really nice home at First Second. Last year, your book, Varmints, was released by First Second. This year is the dog's book that comes out again on the 31st next week as we record this. And then you mentioned the Trees book will come out in 2018, and then that next year, the Cats Science Comics book. Mm-hmm. Are you working on anything now, or do you plan on working on anything that is maybe not First Second related? Because I know you've done work for things like, Adventure Time, Rick and Morty. Do you have any other kind of projects like that on the side that you're currently doing?
Not really, actually. I can really only focus on one thing at a time, and I've got a good 6, 7, 8 months left to work on Cats, so it won't be too long before I have to start considering what's going to come next. But gosh, I love working with First Second. They're great over there. If I can, keep it up, I sure will.
Well, we're the ones who benefit because these are really great books. So, yay!
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean the science comic books are great, but I think what First Second does in a more general sense is something that is very palatable to us, and not just for what Gwen and now Paul do on the Young Readers show. We've discussed a lot of First Second books on the Comics Alternative, so it's I said that you have a home there. I mean, I can't think of a better place to be than First Second, because they do a lot of great stuff.
Me either.
Well, Andy, we want to thank you for once again coming on the Comics Alternative, and this time around talking about your new book, Science Comics Dogs from Predator to Protector, and this comes out on October 31st. We recommend that all of our listeners run out and get a copy.
Fetch it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Wow, Derek, that was so much fun talking to Andy. I learned so much more about dogs and about his process for doing this comic, and it just makes me want to go home and hang out with my dog.
Yeah, one of the things that you and I mentioned during the interview several times is, I guess, the science-heavy aspect, without science-heavy in a good way, right? Not being so complex that, you can't decipher what's going on. And there's a lot that I learned about dogs and how they're, how they function, the breeding, the science, their senses, the way that they perceive the world. And a lot of research went into this book.
Absolutely. And, it's funny because I have a lot of students who read Human Body Theater last year in one of my choruses, and these students were in occupational therapy or physical therapy. And they were all saying to me about Maris Wick's book, oh my gosh, if this was how our textbook had been written, I would have so enjoyed learning this material. And I wish it were written that way. Well, this is true. If anyone's listening to this who's studying biology, this is a really great science text. Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about the dog part because they're cute dogs. It's hard not to talk about it. But I learned a lot about science, and I learned a lot of terminology. I could see myself referring back to this book many times when I'm thinking about these issues or reading about them in the news. So it's really a great book for just science lovers. You don't have to be a dog lover, although I think if you read this book, you might become one. So.
Exactly. And we didn't mention this during the interview, but there is both a glossary and a bibliography in the back of the book. So it's very useful all the way around, as well as entertaining.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We want to thank Andy Hirsch once again for coming back on the Comics Alternative. And, if you want to find out more about the comics work of Andy Hirsch, then head on over to the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. If you go to dcbservice.com and do a search for Andy Hirsch, you will find quite a number of his titles at great discounts. Not only can you find Science Comics Dogs at 30% off the cover price, but you can find his other work, such as last year's Varmints. That's 30% off the cover price at DCB Service. His work with Roger Langridge, Baker Street Peculiars, you can get for 35% off of the cover price. And the various Garfield volumes that Andy illustrated, you can also find for 35% off of the cover price. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your Andy Hirsch text there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about our conversation with him. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can contact us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
You can also contact us by email at twoguys@comicsalternative.com, or you can get in touch with us individually. I'm Gwen at comicsalternative.com. Derek, how can people reach you?
Interestingly enough, Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us all over social media, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
Derek, can people howl at us as well? Would we answer?
If it's loud enough, yes, I'll answer. Yeah, we had a great time doing this interview with Andy Hirsch, but we have more interviews on this podcast in the coming days, so be sure to check back for those. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gwen. See you soon.